For more, I'm joined on set by our international affairs editor, Kethevane Gorjestani. Kethevane, is it fair to say that Israel is stepping up its attacks on Iranian proxies?
Absolutely. And yes, they have been doing that for a while. But these latest strikes are really the most intense that we've seen since October 7th. And you mentioned it. There were two different aspects to these strikes. There were the strikes in northern Syria against members of Hezbollah, as well as the Revolutionary Guards of Iran. There hasn't been a reaction from Syria, only a reaction from the Iranians, from the spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, who called it a blatant and desperate attempt to expand the war to Syria. And then there were the strikes, as you said, in southern Lebanon, where the Israeli army says that they have killed a top commander for Hezbollah. Now, the reason that we're seeing this is that this has been an ongoing plan for the Israelis. Yes, the focus right now is, of course, on Gaza, but there is this talk of the other fronts. There's, of course, what is happening in the West Bank, but also what is happening in Lebanon, or at the border between Israel and Lebanon, and increasingly what is happening in Syria. And the idea for the Israeli forces is that Hamas cannot be separated from these other groups, meaning Hezbollah, as well as Iran, especially with the Revolutionary Guards, but also with all the other proxies that are involved in the region. And what they're doing there is trying to contain the development and the spread of these groups that are aligned with Iran, to try to show that even though their focus is right now on Gaza, they're not forgetting about what is happening at the border with Lebanon, and they're not forgetting about Syria, where the Iranians have really deployed all of these paramilitary groups, as well as the Revolutionary Guard. So there's an aspect of this that is trying to display force from the Israeli army, saying just because we're focused somewhere else doesn't mean that we're giving up on these other fronts, a sort of message to not try to develop these fronts further more than they already are. But again, this has been a long simmering problem, whether it's Lebanon or Syria. This is just the latest example and the strongest example that we've seen since the October 7th attacks.
And meanwhile, in Gaza, after nearly 6 months of war, famine is already setting in. The International Court of Justice issued that warning as they ordered Israel to ensure the unhindered provision of basic services, including food, fuel, and medical supplies. Now, those are the latest so-called provisional measures issued by the ICJ as part of South Africa's ongoing case accusing Israel of genocide. Kethevane, you were talking about those other fronts outside of Gaza, but let's zoom in on Gaza now. What is the latest we know about the situation there and the potential for a ceasefire?
Well, the situation is, of course, dire in Gaza, especially for the civilians. And this ruling by the International Court of Justice, as you mentioned, is binding, but there's little way of actually enforcing it. And really, the Israelis are fighting back what the International Court has just said, saying that they're not the ones hindering humanitarian aid. They're putting the blame on the Palestinian side, saying that they're letting the aid through. And it's just that the Palestinians within Gaza are not able to dispatch that aid. That's something that has been completely dismissed by organizations that are on the ground that are saying that the Israelis are making it extremely difficult for aid to actually get into Gaza, that they're holding it up before it enters Gaza, and that they are the ones to blame. But of course, when you're talking about delivering aid, as long as the fighting continues, delivering aid is going to be complicated no matter what. And the situation on the ground is that the bombings are continuing. There's the operation around Shifa Hospital, which has been going on for almost 2 weeks now. There's, of course, the question of Rafah. Will there be that ground operation that Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying? He just said that the Israelis are getting ready for that ground operation, despite all the warnings and concerns from the international community, starting with the Americans, who, of course, have said that this ground operation would be a big mistake. They're trying to get the Israelis to back off from that idea. There was a supposed meeting between Israeli officials and American officials in Washington that was set for this week. That was canceled after the United States abstained at the UN Security Council on a resolution which angered the Israelis. So that was canceled. But it seems that it's back on track. They haven't really decided on the date yet, but it should be happening probably in the first days of next week. So that seems to be going on. The question is how much leeway or how much advice will the Israelis heed from the Americans? The Americans say they want to see what the Israelis have planned, and they want to give them viable alternatives to a major ground operation in Rafah. This is the situation as we stand. Whether the Israelis are going to take that advice, that's a whole other question. And meanwhile, there's also the talks for the ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu giving the green light for a new round of talks, but we've seen multiple of those and no result yet.
That's right. We'll have to hope that it'll be different the next time around somehow. Kethevane, thank you so much for that roundup of everything coming out of Gaza. That's our international affairs editor there.